Hi, and welcome to Chapter 3, Frameworks for Diagnosing Organization. So this is the what to change. Last time we talked about the how to change. This is the what to change in organizations. So in this chapter, we're going to look at what change leaders must understand about how and what to change. We're going to talk about open systems, right? Organizational frameworks that are valuable tools of assessment for these systems. We'll look at nonlinear and interactive nature of organizations. We'll talk about what that is. And we'll introduce the Quinn's competing values model, which is a way to understand organizational design and organizational culture. And then we'll talk about how organizations change over time. Right, so again, in the book, this is how this fits in. Next chapter, we'll be talking about this awakening. But here we're talking about using the diagnostic framework, right, in Chapter 3 to better understand how and what to change. So we mentioned open systems, right? So open systems exchange information with materials and energy and with their environment. So they're not isolated. They're not an island. They're part of a system. And they have to interact with the system. That's certainly the way the organization is with inputs, outputs, and the general environment in which it resides. So, and we think of a system, right, as a complex, as a product, sorry, of its interrelated and independent parts. So it's a complex web of all these interrelationships as it sits inside this environment where it finds itself. So this is pretty tricky, right? So we have this organization that's surrounded by this environment, so things are constantly changing. Some of the relationships are constantly coupled. There's feedback. Things are happening in non-linear fashion, which means they may jump around, or it may be a lot and then a little, instead of just sort of a proportional. History is all part of it. Everything's taken in context. This organization is probably self-organizing to the extent that things aren't formally organized. The rest will be self-organized. Generally, these systems are adaptive. Certainly, there's lots of trade-offs going on by the elements inside of the system, which in this case would be the people. Right? It can be counterintuitive, and it can be policy resistant. Means it is what it is for a reason, and it's going to be difficult to get it to change. So open systems often seek equilibrium. So they're looking at when a force is applied, how they react to that force, and equal and opposite reactions, and so forth. Individuals in a system may have views that differ greatly from from different people in the same system, right? But things should not be viewed in isolation, right? Things are always interconnected. You need to treat them that way. So here's an example of the Nadler and Tushman organizational congruence model, where here's the organization itself in the middle, the center block, right? And it has inputs and outputs. So the inputs are things like all these things in environment, technology, political things, that sort of thing. They have resources. Resources can be people, money, energy, equipment, supplies, things you consume, those type things. And then there's this historical culture and context of how things are taking, where this may also be put inside the organization. And inside the organization, we have the work we do, the formal organization we do, the informal organization, then all the people that work within that, and it leads us to the outputs, right, which are system level outputs and what kind of units we're outputting, and then the individual outputs, how things are working. Right? And then, of course, there's this environmental pressure on the whole organization, how things are going to happen, how things are going to work. So you can use this model to describe your organization, the organization we're going to analyze in this class. Right? You can categorize what are the key inputs, what are the key outputs, right? And how are they achieved, right? That's a good way to view things. It's nice and simple, get your head around it. Is the strategy in line with the organization's environmental input? So do we have the right strategy based on the situation with which the organization finds itself? When you evaluate your organization's outputs, are there those things your organization should address, right? Are there things your organization should address? So how are they working? Are you getting what you want? Are they efficient and effective? Things like that. When we talked about linear models, right, we talked about things one leads to the next is what we mean by linear in a rational fashion. So we have a situation with a goal, there's a gap while we're not at the goal, right? So we make a decision, how we get the results. That's clearly how linear people, like yours truly, think of the world. Not always the case. Often there's time delays, so lag effects, meaning when something happens, the result isn't seen for a while. Could be weeks, could be months. So you're trying to match those two events together, cause and effect. When the cause happened and there's no effect for weeks or months later, right? Those are difficult to match together. Certainly there's complexity issues, makes these relationships difficult to predict and track, right? And often there's false learning. We think this does this, but not really, right? Just because things are correlated doesn't mean there's causality. So just because things started getting better or sales went up after the new guy got here, maybe the new guy had nothing to do with it. Maybe it was because the economy improved, or we had new products or something like that. So just because things are correlated together doesn't mean they necessarily go together. So I mentioned we're going to look at Quinn's competing values framework. So this is a way to look at basically organizational culture, right, and the effect that has on the organizational design. So we looked at internally versus externally focused. Do we look inward and we worry about our processes and controls in an organization? Or is it externally focused where we're worried about the marketplace, the customers, the environment, and so forth, right? And how is it geared? Is it geared towards flexibility where we give a lot of people decentralized decision-making capability? They can decide what's best and so forth. Or is it structured with lots of command and control? You have to have counter signatures for everything. You have to ask permission. You got to talk to headquarters about this over and over and over again. A little more detail on that. We consider this internally focused, but with a flexibility as the human resources view. So we're going to worry about our people, but we're also going to try to be flexible. As opposed to internally focused and lots of control. Think of that more like an organization that's the main purpose is to follow the rules and processes in the organization, right? And then over here we have externally focused. So again, much more of a one eye on the market kind of thing. We can either be flexible or a rational control. We're going to watch the market, but then we're going to have to get permission for anything we do. And a little more detail on that, even this human resources view is like teamwork in the HR department, group and mentor facilitator rules. So things like how to deal with people are extremely important versus internally focused and control. How do we understand and control the work unit? My example of this is think of like the Department of Motor Vehicles. Their goal is to follow that work there, right? People work there. Their job is to follow the processes and do what the process tell them to do. They don't get to decide how to give you a driver's license. There's no judgment. You follow the rules or you don't get your driver's license, right? And they don't focus on the market because that's not their job. Their job is to follow the law and how people get driver's license. So if there's lots of market demand or less market demand or less market satisfaction, there's no facility built into their system to react to that, right? They do what they do, irrelevant of what the customers want or the market wants and all of that. Versus an open system view, flexibility and externally focused, this is the opposite. So this is like a company of consultants. They don't really have a building. Think of it more like a tent. They're going to fold their tent up and take it wherever they need to, wherever the work is, whatever the client wants. So they plan on being flexible. They have fewer controls, right? And what they really want is lots of external focus on the market and on the customers to get the jobs that they need to survive. Right? And kind of in between those two, the rational view, right, is about we're going to use lots of control to maximize our output. So we're more about being efficient rather than reactive. Right? So we're going to focus on what the market wants, but we're going to use lots of internal controls to try to be as efficient as we can, maybe standardize parts, things like that, so we can be a more efficient producer. In Stacy's complexity theory and organizational change, we look at, we're talking about organizations are really webs of nonlinear feedback loops. You don't know where information is coming from, you don't know how long it's coming and all of that, so it's very complicated, and the book kind of has got a good description of how this works. Feedback systems operate in stable and unstable states of equilibrium. So unstable would be when things are changing, things are reacting, and so forth. And sort of organizations are inherently paradoxes, right? They're always treading the line between stability and instability, right? That's what makes them both interesting and a problem to study. So if an organization is focused too much on stability, they become ossified and change impaired. So they become a dinosaur, and as we all know, the dinosaurs are dead. So you need to be very careful about freezing your information or freezing your organization. Okay? Or organizations come to force of instability, they will disintegrate. So you change so much that nobody knows what's going on. There is no command and control, and the organization just sort of unravels, right? That's a terrible spot to be in. Usually that death is very quick at that point for the organization, right? So of course the key is, the bottom bullet is to find the fine line between the two. Okay? Easier said than done. So in the short term, right, we see things like irregular cycles, discontinuous trends, and all that. But long term, hopefully the trends are more identifiable, so it's things we can deal with, things we can plan with. Right? Certainly a successful organization faces unknown future, but things can and do happen to get a handle on those things. Agents can't control the future in the long term, but they can try to control things in the short term and how they react to the long term. All right, so long-term development is a spontaneous, self-organizing process that may give rise to new strategic directions. Yeah, no kidding. So we're going to have to think about what we're going to do in the long run. All right, so the summary of this chapter looks like when assessing them, organizations, we think of them as open systems and that they interact very much so with the environment around them. All right, changes are often originated in this external environment and they upset the internal equilibrium of the organization, kind of like a cell in the human body. We can have changes that are evolutionary, small, or revolutionary, big. Right, so we need to understand the what and the why of change, right? And the change is non-linear, it's not clear, it's quite frankly messy stuff. All right, so this concludes chapter 3.